Hey everyone, David C. Anderson here coming at you from the Knife Center. Welcome to Knife AQ number 54, the knife series where I answer all your questions, whether they're sharp or dull. This week, talking about a few things including what grind should you choose for your EDC knife, what are some of the best axis locks out there that aren't actually axis locks, and the importance on choosing the right steel for the job at hand. Let's get into it. All right, thank you everyone, as always, for your questions. And if you want a chance to have one of your questions featured in a future episode, the comment section down below is where you'll just drop those. And even if we don't get a chance to answer it on air, I do have a lot of fun combing through those questions. First question today comes from Jonathan Bruitz. What would you say is the best grind for EDC? All right, let's get right into it. So when we talk about EDC, obviously everybody's everyday carry varies based on what they actually need to encounter. But we tend to think of the EDC term as a little more general for like a broad spectrum of people. And for most people out there, what you really need is just a smaller to medium-sized knife that slices pretty well. And as such, the things, the best suited grinds for that are going to be hollow grinds and full flat or high flat grinds in general. That's only one piece of the puzzle, though, that you want to look at. I'll start talking about hollow grinds first, transition to that, and then I'll get into what I mean by the other things you want to look for. This right here is a Wee Kite Fin KnifeCenter exclusive for about $140 if you're interested. And it has a hollow grind, which is essentially a concave carve out from the cross section of the steel. And the advantage of that is you have an edge or a blade geometry behind the edge that gets very thin and stays pretty thin behind the edge, a fair amount up the blade, so to speak. One of the advantages you get from that steel beyond just having a thin geometry behind the edge is over time, as you sharpen it more and more, it's going to stay thinner behind the edge over time, which is pretty nice. Contrast to something like a full flat grind, like on this Spyderco Indela right here. It's a flat plane. In this case, it's a full flat grind because it goes all the way up to the spine. And as you sharpen that, the wedge behind, or the metal behind the edge, is going to get gradually thicker over time. There's things you can do to kind of counteract that. You can, shave away the shoulders as you go, if you ever get to that point. Now, because of that, some people tend to prefer a hollow grind for just the longevity's sake. In this day and age, especially if you get something like this, which has a HAP 40 blade steel itself, something with a really high edge retention, it's not something you're going to be sharpening as much. So it's going to be a pretty long time before you actually encounter any difficulty there. But like I said, the grind itself is only one of the things you have to look at. Another important thing is the actual blade thickness as well, because that's, especially on a full flat grind, that's going to very heavily affect how it's going to perform over time. Both of these right out of the box are going to be pretty good slicers, which is pretty nice. Fairly efficient, not something that's too wedge-like. If you wouldn't really, most people I think wouldn't want to EDC a Scandi grind. But here's an example of why just saying, oh, get a full flat grind. It's only one part of the picture. This here, this SE4, which I have on the table for something else later, you can see it has a full flat grind, but it is a much thicker blade steel than this Indela right here. So just saying, oh, a full flat's gonna slice better, not always the case, because you have to look at those other things as well. Just keep those in mind, but generally, flats and hollows, very adaptable and very easy to use and very appropriate for most people's EDC. All right, speaking of Scandi grinds, next question comes from Van's World. Is there a steel that lends themselves well to a Scandinavian grind? And why is it so difficult to find a Scandi folder? I love how easy it is to sharpen a Scandi. The quicker and easier it is to sharpen, the more likely I am to do it often enough. Any hints? Yes, I do have a few. So we just kind of touched on why you don't see too many Scandi folders is, for most folks, the folder is going to be just an EDC everyday item, and Scandis aren't necessarily the best slicers. They're very good at stuff like woodwork, so you're going to see it more often in like a camping and outdoor scenario, and those people are going to be more likely I'm one of them, to carry a fixed blade rather than a folder. So that's why you don't see too many. There's some out there, you know, the Cold Steel Thin Wolf series is great. Tops makes a few. Castrum, I've got a Castrum fixed blade here. But in terms of what steels lend themselves well to the application, here we go. I've got a Scandi grind right here. This is an LT Wright Gen 5. Rather than having, you know, that full flat plane from the spine all the way down and then the secondary bevel at the edge, a Scandi grind is essentially a short flat grind with no secondary bevel. You can kind of think of it a little more like a chisel than an actual knife grind, and that's why it tends to work really well on stuff like wood. Now, the edge itself, well, let's back up. Let's talk about this this flat grind knife right here. I think from the factory, Spyderco shoots for about an 18-degree bevel on each side of the sharpened edge. 20 degrees is about a kind of a standard sharpening metric out there. When you have a Scandi grind, that angle is going to be typically closer to something like 12 degrees per side. So that edge itself is going to be much narrower, much more acute on a Scandi grind than on something else. And when you get really acute edges, the toughness of a steel becomes much more important because that thinner edge is going to be easier to deform, so that extra toughness is going to be needed to resist that. As such, tough steels. The A2 on this blade is great. It's a carbon steel. Most carbon steels tend to be tougher than most stainless steels, which is why you see a lot of carbon steels on Scandi grinds in general. There are stainless options, however. This Castrum right here uses Sandvik's 14C28N. This is one of their number 10 models. That particular stainless steel has a really tight grain structure and is pretty darn tough. So it is also a good choice for a Scandi grind. Just in general, that's the rule of thumb essentially. Stick to the tougher steels. I wouldn't really want like an S110V Scandi grind knife out there. I just have a feeling it'd be way too brittle and would chip out way too easily. So stick to the tough stuff and you'll be good to go.
Unless you're looking for a challenge.
I mean, if you want to like self-serrate your Scandi grind, they might be a good choice. All right, well, anyway, Robert Summers with the next question asks, in your opinion, what is the best axis lock style knife for EDC that's not made by Benchmade? Price range from $50 to $200, quite a range there. I have several Benchmades and I love the axis lock, but I'd like to add something similar that's not a Benchmade to the collection. Sure thing. Obviously, Benchmade's axis lock is kind of the, it's the benchmark crossbar lock that everyone out there, now that their patent has opened up, everyone's shooting for the big dogs. And there's some good stuff. I'll start with a SOG, the Terminus XR. This is the LTE version right here. It comes in about $140. S35 VN blade, carbon fiber handles, carbon fiber liners as well, which is pretty interesting. They have a really nice take on the crossbar lock. They call it their XR lock. One of the things that you're going to find with a SOG that you're not going to be able to find in the Benchmade lineup, at least not anymore, is a crossbar lock with a flipper tab. Traditionally, it's been pretty hard to do because it's not like on a frame lock knife tuning a detent just right. Since you have that sliding bar that actually contacts the tang of the knife, complicates things a little bit. And Benchmade had some knives out there that did it, and they've since discontinued it. So this is the way to get a flipper if you want with a crossbar lock. The other cool thing they do is the way they shape the tang of the blade. As you move that lock bar back, when you go to open it, it's actually starting to push that blade out just a little bit. Pretty cool touch. Really good knife, really good pattern here. I will say though, my favorite non-Benchmade crossbar lock has to go to Hogue, however. I've got two knives here, a SIG K320 and a Hogue Deca here. The SIG is made by Hogue. Both of these particular ones, KnifeCenter exclusives. The reason I say Hogue is out of the box, without fail, every single one I have ever picked out, handled, flipped the lock, 100% smooth, buttery action every time. Benchmade does a good job, but sometimes they're out of the box. I'll say there can be a little hit or miss. They might need a little bit of breaking in. Now, I own a ton of Benchmade axis locks. I have never had one of their axis lock knives not break in and get to that point where they're flipping completely smooth and every time, and they're just oh so sweet. Hogue's out of the box every single time. Rock solid. and ready to go. But as for these two knives themselves, the Deca is often mentioned as a bug out competitor. So if you've got that frame of reference from your Benchmade collection, really nice. Price on this particular one with the black coating is about $149, but we've got the clip point and the modified Wharncliffe in both black and stonewash, which is about $140, with the cool red G-Mascus G10 handles. Nice action, like I mentioned. Not a deep carry pocket clip like the bug out, but just a really cool knife. High flat grind, not a full flat, but again, really thin blade geometry here. We talked about that earlier. So this is going to be a very, very slicey knife. As for the K320 right here, prices on these are pretty good. Made in America, both of these guys. This is about $119 right now. Stonewashed S30V blade, polymer handles, in a way, very much a Griptilian competitor. Very similar size there. Not quite as much length on the handle because they've kind of done it so you get a little bit of a finger choil there for choking up if you want. Again, buttery smooth action. Tip down carry if you want it. You don't see that very often at all when it comes to crossbar locks. I think the only other ones I can think of, Benchmade has their SOCP flipper or folder, I think. And they make, Hogue makes one for H&K as well that does the same thing, the Exemplar, I think. Really cool knives overall, really affordable, or really attainably priced, not a cheap knife, for a premium USA-made product. All right, next question comes from Simon Gabrielson. Hi, is there any good folding skinning knives out there? I'm looking for a large traditional slip joint or lockback, and it has to have a thin blade. Best regards. Sure thing. So when you talk about folding skinning knives, I mean the thing that comes to, or when you talk about folding skinning knives and have the word traditional in there in your sentence, which I'm going to make sure to focus on. I mean, the Buck 110 comes immediately to mind. It's almost not worth mentioning. Not the thinnest blade out there, but it does have a hollow grind. It's going to work pretty well. But because you said traditional, I had some other things in mind, like the Spyderco Stretch, but that's not traditional, but that's a good thin-bladed lockback knife. But how about something that blends the traditional slip joint styling and a traditional lockback styling into something? Case Copper Lock. Not a huge knife. I mean, it's about a 3¼ inch, 3½ inch blade, somewhere in that range. I actually haven't measured it. Decently priced. This one's a little more expensive. This is one of the fancier ones, about $83. Part of their pocket worn series with the jig bone handles. But you get styling like a slip joint. You get a very thin blade, which you tend to get on a lot of traditional slip joints. Full flat grind on this guy, very slicey. And you get the security of a lockback. Made in the USA to boot. Really nice little knives. There's a minier version, but you did say large, and this may not quite be large enough for you. But I still think it's going to be a really, really good option. All right, now we come to the lightning round for today. First question from Willie McCabe. This is in response to a question last week where I said, where I kind of put down clones, like you don't want to buy a clone knife. It says, sorry DCA, but your comment about clone knives is way off the mark. Not all of us can afford high dollar knives, and he goes on, but I'm going to stop it there because this is a sentiment that also really bugs me. I can't afford everything I want either, but that doesn't mean I'm entitled to it. Full stop. Thanks so much. Dustin Ewing with the next question is, what is your opinion on 1095 versus 1095 Cro-Van? I've experienced Essie's 1095 and I love it. It can be sharpened beyond razor sharp and it's super tough. How does the 1095 Cro-Van differ? Yes, Essie does a great job with their 1095. They're kind of recognized in the industry as having a rock solid 1095 heat treatment. They just do a really good job. And that's thanks to Rowan Manufacturing, who actually builds these knives for Essie. 1095 CV or 1095 Cro-Van, you see it on a lot of K-bars. This is a K-bar B16, or sorry, a Becker BK16 right here, made by K-bar. And I'll skip to the end basically first. The difference in use, you're not going to be able to tell the difference, honestly, in use. The CV is chromium and vanadium. There's small elements of that in this particular steel. It doesn't really change the characteristics of the steel in use any appreciable amount. It's mainly there to help in the heat treatment. It helps with grain refinement and repeatability makes it a little bit easier for the mass marketing or the mass production environment to heat treat it well every single time. But when it comes down to choosing between the two knives, don't let the steel of one or the other sway you. They're both going to be great. Base your decision on which knife you like best in this particular case. I guess that was a little less of a lightning round answer. That could have been in the standard regular section.
Well, it's part of the course of how we've been treating lightning round.
I gotta get better at that. Chris Reuther asks, would you ever go on Forged in Fire? No. That was quick.
Getting longer.
Reason being, I have absolutely no blacksmithing experience, which is what that show's about. So I wouldn't last much past the initial interview anyway. So no, I wouldn't go on Forged in Fire. Chris Carnes asked, hey DCA, I've been looking for a Spyderco Shaman, but I've had no luck finding one. What could you recommend as a substitute under the $150 mark? I like the handle ergonomics, blade shape, and the action. Love the videos, keep it up. Thanks. That SIG K320. I've mentioned this a little bit before, but because the Shaman has been so hard to find for a while now, just because of production bottlenecks, etc., a lot of folks have been asking. You can go for the drop point version, not the Tonto version, but this actually, especially at just over $100, like or under 120, pretty good alternative to that particular knife. Which brings us to our most serious question of the day from TPH Victims. Can I use a machete or a double bit axe as a concealed neck knife? Depends on how big your neck is, my friend. Or, it's not double bit, but I do have this RMJ Bumblebee Mini Tomahawk. And it is a neck knife. It comes with a chain right there. See? There you go. So yes, maybe ask them to make a double bit someday and maybe they'll hook you up. That is it for our questions today. Again, as always, if you have a question you want answered in a future episode, leave it down below and maybe we'll be able to pick it in said future episode. If you want to get your hands on any of these knives, we'll leave links as always in the description to take you over to KnifeCenter.com. Make sure you sign up for our Knife Rewards program so that at least you earn some free money to spend on your next knife when you buy one of these knives today. I'm David C. Anderson from the Knife Center, signing off. See you next time.